Before we start, understand this is not about a toy. It is about a door. If a board ever answers you tonight, do not ask who it is. Ask why it needs your hands. I'm not easily impressed by parlor tricks, and I do not scare from cardboard and ink. But this is not about cardboard. It is about the kind of ink that does not dry. We were teenagers the first time, in a finished basement that smelled like laundry and rain. It was Halloween, because of course it was. And the storm outside was doing the most. My friend Erica had found an old Ouija board in a cedar trunk her great aunt left behind. It was not glossy. It was warped at the corners, scorched along one edge, and the letters looked hand-carved by somebody who wanted results, not neat lines. There were 3 of us that night. Me, Erica, and Sean. We were not drunk, just bored and rumored to be brave. I lit a single candle and set the planchette in the middle. We placed our fingers lightly because every scary movie says, that's what you do. Erica said, "Is anyone here with us? Like customer service for the dead?" The planchette slid to yes on the wood. That should not have been slick. We laughed hard enough to shake the table because laughing is easier than leaving. "What is your name?" I asked. The planchette moved slow, left, right, up, Corvin. Corvin. None of us knew the name. The planchette kept moving. Blood. It spelled the word like it was tired of our questions. The candle hissed like it had touched water. Sean jerked his hand back with a strangled gasp and grabbed his finger. Blood had welled under his nail, where it rested on the board. No splinters, no cut, just a thin, insistent bleed that moved across the letters like someone had written with it. We snatched our hands away, and the planchette ticked forward on its own. "Okay, cute," Erica said, because denial is a life raft. "Prove it." The planchette snapped hard to L, then O, then O, then K, then U, then P. Look up. We looked at each other instead, because bravery is loud until the instructions get specific. The ceiling scratched. Not quick, not frantic, heavy, measured. It sounded like something big dragging its weight from beam to beam, testing the nails. A dot fell onto the board in front of us. It was not wax. It was thick and dark and smelled like iron. Another drop followed, and another, and then a slow patter like the ceiling had learned to breathe. We slammed the board back into the trunk. We piled a laundry basket on top, then a box of Christmas lights, then a toolbox, because humans stack things when we can't solve them. We promised we were done. The house did not care about promises. The first week, every mirror in Erica's place cracked from the inside out. No thrown hairbrush, no temperature change, just a quiet expanding break that made the glass look like a web trying to crawl off the wall. Lacey, Erica's little sister, woke to letters carved into the plaster above her bed. Not scratched, carved deep enough to collect dust in the grooves. The word was Corvin, over and over, stacked until the wall looked like it was practicing. We spackled the cuts. The next morning, the fresh plaster held the word again, neat as a stamp. Sean's finger never healed. The skin around his nail turned gray, then black, and the color crawled up his hand like rot traveling on a map. Every bandage soaked through in hours. Doctors use the phrase non-healing wound, which is a soft way to say, we do not know. His palm swelled. The veins at his wrist went dark. He started wearing a hoodie in July because the air on that hand made him sick. 3 weeks later, he collapsed in his bedroom. By the time the paramedics arrived, his skin had split along the veins like something inside had pushed hard to get out. His hands were stained black to the wrist, not like dirt, like soaked. I will not perform those details for you, but know this part. It was not a normal passing. Sometimes grief is not sad first. It's angry. We buried Sean on a Friday. On Sunday afternoon, Erica and I went back to the basement to throw the board out for real. The trunk we had buried under boxes stood open. The Ouija board sat in the center of the concrete floor like it had pulled itself out and waited politely. The letters looked swollen and dark, as if the wood had been drinking. The candle from that first night had somehow rolled out and laid beside it. Crusted in black, the whole room smelled like pennies. I touched the board with the back of my fingers because that felt safer than the front. My skin came away sticky. The letters looked a shade darker where I had touched them. We called a woman from the next town who does not sell crystals or Latin. She deals in boundaries. She walked the house with salt in one hand and smoke in the other and said, "Something in here made a promise with your mouths." She stood over the board and added, "And that is your receipt." We dragged a steel fire pit into the yard. We laid the board in the bowl, built a careful pyramid of wood over it, and lit the stack. It took like it had been waiting. The flame burned high and then lower. The board darkened, then blackened, then flexed. When it finally split, the fire screamed like wet wood does, but the pitch was wrong, like someone had pulled the sound against its will. Ash floated up in a soft sheet and then drifted down onto our hands in a gray that left a faint red when we wiped it away. The boundary woman said, "It is not about the heat. It is about consent." She looked at the pit and said, "This board is not finished with you." The basement stayed cold after that evening when the furnace ran. Not chilly, cold that made the air feel heavy. When Erica went downstairs, her breath showed in a thin ribbon that moved toward the trunk. At night, the new mirror in her room fogged in a perfect circle, not from her breathing, but from something smaller standing too close. She taped the mirror. The fog circles bled through the tape, like the glass was exhaling. I started hearing knocking under my kitchen sink at 3:17 every night. 3 slow raps. A pause. 3 more. I opened the cabinet and found nothing but a quiet pipe that felt warm to the touch. One night I tapped back because curiosity is a dare we give ourselves. The knocks answered my rhythm with one change. The last knock, the pipe exhaled the word door in the softest breath you can imagine. I did not open anything. The call started a week after Sean's funeral. Unknown number. Voicemail with no words, only the sound of a steady breath and a small dragging noise like a fingertip sliding across wood. Then a text from a number with too many digits. It said, "Look up." When I looked at the ceiling, I saw nothing but paint. When I looked down at my phone, the outgoing camera had taken a photo of its own. It showed my ceiling, yes, but it also showed a faint brown ring where the planchette used to sit, printed over the drywall, like a watermark. I turned the phone off and wrapped it in a towel for the night, like I did not want it to hear. Erica found the planchette 2 days later. It sat on her bedroom dresser, where she puts jewelry and loose change, and it looked cleaner than the day we met it. We had watched that thing burn. She did what brave people do when their bravery is tired. She slid the planchette into a Ziploc bag, wrote "Do not open" on the plastic with a Sharpie, and put it in the freezer. The next morning, the bag was back on the dresser with the marker words printed backward inside the plastic, like the letters had climbed through. We tried to research the name, Corvin. Some old Latin roots, some Black family names in New Orleans and Baltimore, a handful of 19th century men proud of corn and violence. None of it lined up. And when a thing is older than your search results, it lets the noise distract you. The boundary woman said names can be borrowed. She said think less about identity and more about appetite. That night, Erica dreamed of Sean for the first time since the funeral. He stood in her doorway and lifted his hand like he was about to knock on air. When he turned his palm toward her, the nail beds were slick and dark, and letters were pressed into his skin in reverse, like someone had used him for a stamp. She woke up with her own fingers aching. When she flexed them, a flake of something black cracked under her middle nail and fell onto the sheet. We decided to return the board's pieces to the trunk, because if we could not end it, we could at least put it back where it came from. We carried the ash pan down the stairs and set it on the floor. Erica opened the trunk. Inside were things that should not have been there. A dinner plate circle of lake ice melting into a silver coin, water, a loop of rusted chain, a tuft of deer hair, and a single human molar with a silver filling that looked almost new. The ash in the pan shifted toward the trunk, without wind. We closed the lid. We sat on it. We cried. I do not mind telling you that part. The boundary woman returned with a different plan. Do not feed it a dramatic exit. She said, no Latin, no screaming. No screaming into the yard. It wants spectacle. Give it procedure. She brought 4 unglazed clay pots and 4 bags of clean dirt. She wore cheap gardening gloves and a look that said she had cleaned up worse messes than us. We divided the ash into the pots, quietly, like packing a loved one for a flight. We salted the dirt and pressed it down gently. We sealed each pot with beeswax. We placed one at the north wall of the basement and one at the south, and so on. Then we sat on the stairs with the light on and waited. The house made all its normal sounds. It made exactly none of the new ones. The boundary woman said it will test the seams. Be boring. Bored things cannot be baited as easily as scared ones. For a month, the house exhaled like a person who had been holding their breath. The mirror stayed clear, the pipe stayed quiet, no calls, no knocks. I walked past the basement door every morning and every night and felt nothing but air. It made me suspicious because that is what survival does. You start to distrust the peace like it is a trick. On a Sunday, I heard a little scuff on the basement stairs and went still. It came again. I opened the door and found Erica's cat, Luna, sitting on the top step. With one paw lifted politely, she blinked like she had a question about the downstairs. I said, not today, and closed the door. Sometimes power looks small. 2 weeks later, the call returned at 3:03 a.m. The caller ID said, private. I let it ring. The voicemail notification popped up, and I pressed play with my thumb. There was breathing. There was the soft, ragged sound of a finger sliding in small circles on wood. Then there was my voice saying my name, the way I do when I test a microphone. And then Sean's voice said, look up. I looked at the ceiling and saw nothing but paint. I looked at the wall and saw 4 clay pots, sweating, a little seep at the seam. Not water, not wax, but something that stained like tea and dried like rust. The seep slowed as I watched. I put my palm on each lid, one after another, and whispered, not today. This is the part of the story without fireworks. This is the part where procedure wins. The next morning, I took the pots to 4 different places. One went to a church I do not attend, but respect. One went to a cemetery where the groundkeepers praise more than he mows. One went to the river where the current does not play. One went to an elder's porch, and she set it in a circle of brick and said, we will feed it small silence every day. I thanked the boundary woman with cash and a hug she accepted like she had not been hugged in a week. The house warmed, the mirror stayed a mirror, the pipe learned how to be a pipe. Lacey's wall healed, 1 letter at a time, until the plaster was only plaster again. Erica put the cedar trunk out on the curb with a sign that said, free, and the boundary woman moved it back to the porch with a note that read, no. We kept it empty. Months later, I was recording late when my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It said, Corvin says hello. I typed, who is this? Because we all make that mistake. 3 dots pulsed like someone was typing underwater. Then the dots stopped. Then nothing. I blocked the number and put the phone face down. I finished my episode in a room that belonged to me again. Here is what I want you to hear through the scare. Some doors are loud and some doors are polite. The polite ones are worse. They ask for your hands. They ask for your voice. They ask for your curiosity. They wait until you mistake attention for authority. When you realize a question can be consent, it is already late. Not too late, but later than you wanted. So if your hands ever rest on a planchette and it moves under your fingers, lift them. If a board asks for your blood, remember that blood is a signature you cannot scrub from wood. If a name you do not know spells itself in your house, cover your mirrors and call someone who believes in boundaries. And do not perform for the dark. Be boring, be steady, be the kind of person a hungry thing cannot bait. People say Ouija boards are just cardboard. They forget that contracts can be written on anything. This has been your story with Madam Fear. If a board ever carves its answer in blood, do not ask who knocked. Ask what you invited and what it plans to take